So again, I'm Janet B. I've recovered from compulsive eating and bulimia. Happy to be here on this freezing cold Thursday morning. And today we are going to study the family afterward. So if you have your big book, we are on page 122. And as we know, step 12 says, having had a spiritual awakening, we tried to carry this message to other compulsive eaters. So that's really the chapter working with others, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So this chapter really shows us principles to practice. And when I went through prepping this chapter recently, I looked for three things. I looked for principles for us to practice, evidence of miracles, and what it tells us about God. So as we go through, we're going to see principles, miracles, and God. So it starts out by saying there are certain attitudes that we're supposed to take with the husband who's still recovering. Of course, also people in general, certain attitudes. And they say, okay, here's two attitudes we're not supposed to take. We're not supposed to wrap people in cotton wool, and that means like walk on eggshells around them, afraid to say anything. And we're not supposed to put other people on a pedestal. So, two things. And it says we have to meet on the common grounds of tolerance, understanding, and love. So, if you are like making a note of principles to practice, some of them are tolerance, understanding, and love. It says it involves ego deflation. We are likely to have fixed ideas about the family's attitude, and we're interested in having our own wishes respected. And then it tells us kind of a negative promise. The more we demand that others concede to us, that others do what I want, the more resentful they will become, and it makes discord and unhappiness. So if I have discord and unhappiness in my home, then I need to look, do I have demands? And I really had to think about this one recently. My daughter is recently married, and there's some issues, and I believe that her mother-in-law is like not doing what I think and is kind of crossing boundaries with my daughter. And I started thinking, if my daughter has a baby, instead of wanting me there, she's going to want my mother-in-law, her mother-in-law, because that mother-in-law is really getting in there. And I had to stop and think and just realize I'm not entitled to be with my daughter when she gives birth. And yes, of course, I would want to, but the only way I could live in serenity is to realize I'm not entitled to it. I'm not entitled. And by the way, my daughter's not even pregnant. I'm not entitled to have grandchildren. I'm not entitled to be there when my daughter gives birth. If the mother-in-law wants to throw her a baby shower, I'm not entitled to be the one who throws the shower. And this allows me to live in peace. This allows me to just go through life in peace. So, what I know that I have to do is I have to take my demands and take them down a level to just wishes. How do I do that? I say, God, please remove my entitlement. And then I focus on other people. That's why it's so good to sponsor people, because there's always ways to focus on others. So again, we have to get rid of our demands. And they say we're always trying to arrange the family show to our liking, and that we have to stop doing that. And they say, this is bottom of page 122, cessation of drinking. So stopping eating compulsively is the first step away from an abnormal condition. So we can't just say, well, I'm not binging anymore, so everyone just ought to be happy and do everything I want. No, we can't do that. In page 123, they say, there are going to be shortcuts that we're going to want to take. And if we do, we're going to wander and lose our way. So they say, suppose we tell you some of the obstacles a family will meet. So an obstacle is something that gets in the way of something else. So these are the obstacles that get in the way of love and tolerance. Okay, so they tell us, here's a pitfall. They say they remember when father, so it can be our husband, our kids, whoever, was a certain way. And when it falls short, the family may be unhappy. So I heard this beautiful line, expectations are resentments under construction. So I just need to try to rid myself of expectations and demands, because then I'm always pleasantly surprised, right? If things go well. But I don't need other people to be a certain way for me to be happy. And they tell us God, they believe, almost owes this recompense on a long overdue account. It's like, okay, I'm doing what I'm supposed to. I'm working 12 steps. I'm working really hard. Now, God, you owe me. You owe me a good life. You owe me for the power not to go out when there's a storm. I realize I'm thinking, gosh, I'm really afraid that, this power is going to go out in this next storm we have. The last storm we had, it didn't, thank God. And then I just thought, who am I to think that I should be entitled to escape from life's hardships? So it's like, yeah, I'd prefer the power doesn't go out. But God, if like in your grand scheme of things, it's better for my power to go out, I'll put on my winter coat and, be okay with it. Um, and then they go ahead and they say, they're talking about father. So they're talking about the newly recovered person. It may take him many seasons of hard work to be restored financially, but he shouldn't be reproached. So that means we don't nag. We don't nag the people in our lives because they're not making enough money, because they're not doing this, they're not doing that. We don't reproach other people. And they say perhaps he will never have much money again, but the wise family will admire him for what he is trying to be rather than for what he is trying to get. Like God is more concerned with our character than with our comfort. And I will tell you, the best way to keep peace in the house is to praise the people for their good character traits. My son is going through some hard military training right now. In fact, he said, this is the hardest week of all. I praise him for his perseverance. I praise him for his willingness to serve his country. Praise. And what does that do? It builds good relationships. It doesn't do any good if I say, Daniel, you went on this hard training and this land navigation. That's when I guess they're dropped in the middle of nowhere, given a compass and coordinates and told to find a certain spot in the dark and cold. I could have said, Daniel, you could have practiced before you went. You could have taken a compass and like simulated it. What's that going to do? Is that going to make him say, oh, Mom, thanks for telling me. I love you so much more for telling me that. No, I just praise him for what he's doing. And, if he doesn't pass, the army will take care of it. He can get mad at the army and come to me as a safe space. So we praise people for what they're trying to do. And they go ahead, page 124, they talk about the family may try and put in a closet and padlock the door, bad experiences. Principle, page 124. We think that such a view is self-centered and in direct conflict with the new way of living. I'm self-centered if I want want to take the things in my past, some of the like horrible things I've done, like stealing other people's food, pretending I was raped so my boyfriend would pay more attention to me, taking money from people under like lying to them. Well, I can't do that. I have to remember that. And I have to let people know so they don't say, oh, Janet, she's all together, but she was probably always all together. So I could, no, I'll like, and one time I talked about how I had faked a rape. And I started sponsoring a girl and she said to me, I faked a rape also. That my talking about what I had done made it easier for her. Okay, another principle, page 124, it says, we grow by our willingness to face and rectify our errors and convert them into assets. How do we convert them into assets? Again, by going to God, asking his forgiveness, making amends if we have to, and then sharing it with other people so we can be a safe space for them. Continuing on the page, it says, showing others who suffer how we were given help is the very thing which makes life seem so worthwhile to us now, right? Helping others. And then something beautiful they tell us about God. Cling to the thought that in God's hands, the dark past is the greatest possession you have, the key to life and happiness for others. With it, you can avert death and misery for them. Okay, so here it is. So I like do something bad, like fake a rape to get attention, which is like a pretty rotten thing, right? I went to the hospital, this took time from the doctor, the nurses got a fake rape exam, all this stuff. So I say I'm sorry, I put it in God's hands, and then God does something to this, like when it's in hands, and converts it into an asset, something I can use to help others. So it's not I do something bad and then I can use it to help others. It passes through God's hands, and God converts it into something beautiful that I can use to help others. Then they give us some advice. They talk about in the first flush of spiritual experience. So when someone makes their amends, people forgive each other and draw closer. The miracle of reconciliation was at hand. So that's one kind of miracle we get in this program, the miracle of reconciliation. We are reconciled to people when it's difficult. Hard people, we get reconciled. And they say, but what we should not do, page 125, unless some good and useful purpose is to be served, past occurrences should not be discussed. So that means, so let's say when my son was living at home, he said, Mom, I'm sorry that I did whatever. And then 3 days later, he does something else. And then I say, not only did you do this, but 3 days ago, you did that. And just pile it on. No, once something is, forgiven, that's it. And we don't bring it up unless there's a good reason for it. And seldom is there a good reason. So again, we forgive and we forget. Isn't that how I want other people to deal with my mistakes? To just forgive and forget. Isn't that how I want God to deal with my mistakes? To forgive and totally forget. Well, if my job in life is to really become more like my creator, then I need to do what he does, forgive and forget. Page 125, they say another principle we observe carefully is we do not relate intimate experiences of another person unless we are sure he would approve. So we don't gossip, and we don't do it under the guise of, oh, let me tell you what so and so's doing so you can pray for them. No, we keep confidences. Bottom of that paragraph, page 125. We alcoholics, we compulsive eaters are sensitive people. Sensitive people. That doesn't mean that like we like poetry and sunsets. That means we are prickly. If someone says something that we don't like, we get all upset too easily. We get upset too easily. And they say it takes some of us a long time to outgrow that serious handicap. How can we outgrow that serious handicap? When someone says something to us and we automatically react, first, we can be quiet. We don't have to respond right away. Not every thought that comes into my head do I have to accept as gospel truth, right? Some thoughts may come into my head and I need to just sit and pray and let myself calm down first. Page 126. Sometimes mother and children think that because they've been neglected and misused in the past, they think father owes them, that he should show his contrition. What a good way to go through life, to not feel like anybody owes me anything. To just feel like God's got my back. No one has to do anything for me to be happy. And page 125, the family must realize that dad, though marvelously improved, is still convalescing. And that's something for ourselves, right? We come, we work these 12 steps. Usually someone works them in a couple of months. we're not going to be where we rarely get resentments or rarely get fear. We're still convalescing, so we can have some grace on ourselves. But it says, though improved. So we should see growth in ourselves. So, how do we see growth? So, let's say when I used to get a resentment, it would take me 2 days to recover from it, to resolve it. Well, then it gets to be 1 day, and then like 5 hours, and then 30 minutes. I mean, I find that I can resolve most of my resentments pretty quickly. So we should see growth, like a faster bounce back period. And then again, they give a principle to deal with other people. Let them praise his progress, positive reinforcement. They say, if there is crankiness, depression, and apathy in a family member, so they're telling us how to deal with someone who's cranky, apathetic, and depressed. This will disappear when there is tolerance, love, and spiritual understanding. Tolerance, that means like my threshold to endure hard things is raised, that I'm okay. Everything doesn't have to go my way. Love, I mean, love is made up of a few elements, some of which are loyalty, self sacrifice, forgiveness, and spiritual understanding, to put myself in another person's shoes. And again, they say the head of the house, so this would be us, the recovering addict, ought to remember he is mainly to blame what happened in his house. And says financial recovery is on its way, but for us, material well-being always followed spiritual progress. It never preceded. Well, how come? And I think that's really a promise from God, that God doesn't want us to forget him. And if we get like too much money too quickly, we're more apt to just forget about him. So he wants us to develop like some spiritual chops first, some spiritual muscles. Okay, again, page 127. Since the home has suffered more than anything else, it is well that a man exert himself there. So that means effort. He is not likely to get far in any direction if he fails to show unselfishness and love under his own roof. So that's really, they're telling me that if I'm selfish and unloving in my home, I shouldn't expect to be abstinent, right? It says he is not likely to get far in any direction. So I could go to 100 meetings, make 1,000 phone calls, sponsor, 1,000 people. If I'm nasty and inconsiderate and selfish and mean in my own house, I'm not going to recover. So they tell us this is where we have to exert ourselves. This is where we have to put in work. And for me, the exerting myself when my kids were teenagers meant getting outside help, because my kids were really difficult. They were adopted from orphanages. They were more difficult than the average kid. So I had to get some help. And that was okay. It didn't mean I was a failure. It didn't mean I had no recovery. But just like if I had a broken leg, I would go get outside help. When, difficult things in the house, it's okay for us to get outside help. Okay. So they say, as we begin to see our shortcomings and admit them to others, this is bottom of page 127, we lay a basis for helpful discussions, and that we can have family talks to be carried on without heated argument. So it doesn't mean I never disagree, but not in a heated way. No self-pity, no self-justification, or resentful criticism. So once, what I tell my sponsees if they've got tough marriages, and I'm like, until you get through your steps, you say nothing, no complaining, no criticizing, unless your husband is doing something dangerous. But other than that, nothing. Then you make your amends. And first, it's amazing how many times women say, gosh, I didn't realize it was me. It wasn't him all along. But then, of course, there's still issues that come up anytime you have people living together. And it talks about helpful discussions. So I suggest, pick a night when you and your husband are both free And you have time that this is when you can bring stuff up. So for my husband and I, it's Sunday nights. He'll say to me, is there anything we need to check in on? And if there's something that he's done that's annoying me, I'll mention it. I'll say, I really don't like when whatever, whatever. And then I'll say, is there anything you want to bring up? And he'll bring up something like, can you please not leave your tablespoon in the refrigerator, go put them. It's like, yeah, sure. So, we do this so that things don't build up to be resentments. And bottom of 127, again, they see mother and children will see they ask too much, and father will see he gives too little. Page 128, giving rather than getting will become the guiding principle. So we are supposed to go places, and what a good practice everywhere we go to think, what can I give to this situation? Right? I had a relative who would go to the grocery and like eat the little samples and like feel really happy, like, oh, I'm getting something here. But isn't it better to walk into the grocery store and say, let me look for some like cans that may be on the wrong shelf and put them away, right? We can look for to be giving rather than getting in any situation. Page 128, they talk about when the father, the person who recovered, is now saying, God did this, God did so much for me, you better get God. And, is telling his family, who's been fine all along, you better get my brand of God right away. And they say, okay, if the father acts like this, the family may not really like it. They may be jealous of a God who has stolen dad's affections. They're grateful he drinks no more, but they may not like the idea God has accomplished the miracle where they failed. They often forget Father was beyond human aid, and they don't see why their love and devotion didn't straighten him out. Well, I guess if we were to be asked, like, what's the strongest human power in the world? I think most of us would agree that that's love, right? Love is the strongest human power in the world. But they say Father was beyond human aid. We are beyond human aid. We are beyond the power of love to get us straightened out. We're beyond that. And it says, what happened? God has accomplished the miracle where they failed. That's a miracle. The miracle of not drinking anymore, of not eating compulsively anymore. The miracle. God has accomplished that. People can't do miracles. Only God can do miracles. You know, so we have to realize sometimes if other people are getting better, and I have to realize this when I'm sponsoring. It's not my words of wisdom. It's not my love. Maybe I can guide them, make them feel comfortable, make them feel loved. But if there were no God still alive and well and doing miracles, they would not recover. The job of a sponsor is to take her sponsee's hand and put it in the hand of God so that she can experience the miracle that only God can bring. Okay. And then bottom of 128, they talk about joy. We have joy at our release from a lifetime of frustration, right? We're like joyous. Of course, it's such a good feeling. And they say, Father feels he has struck something better than gold. Yes, we have. It says, he has barely scratched a limitless load, which will pay dividends only if he mines it for the rest of his life and insists on giving away the entire product. We've barely scratched a limitless load. We can never learn enough about God. And what do we have to do? We have to mine it. Step 11, prayer and meditation to learn more about God, to grow closer to God, and insist on giving away the entire thing, sponsoring, helping others. And they continue on page 129 to say, a spiritual life which does not include his family obligations may not be so perfect after all. So yeah, we go to our kids' t-ball games. We help our spouses. Like we do things for our family members. Otherwise, it's a lopsided spiritual life. Bottom of page 129, they say during the first days of convalescence, helping others will do more to ensure his sobriety than anything else. Now, obviously, if we're like very early on, we can't go sponsoring, we can't go helping people. Back when meetings were in person, we could give people rides to meetings, we could set up the coffee. So we can look to do things for other people that are a self-sacrifice. If we're living in a house where like our husband always does his own laundry, we can do our husband's laundry. If we live by ourselves, here's some ideas I've heard. I had a sponsor, she would drive to Target and fold clothes there. A sponsee, she would go to the gym and she would wipe down, more equipment than she used. We look to help others, right? Because it tells us that self-sacrifice is so necessary on page 114. I'm sorry, page 14, right? If an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots that lay ahead. So they're telling us a few things there, right? There's going to be trials and low spots, right? I might lose power, relatives may get sick, bad things may happen. They say certain trials and low spots. So the odds are real good that we're going to have hard things. And the only way to survive is self-sacrifice for others. It's like it builds the muscle in our soul, right? Like if I go to the gym and I do bicep curls, well, then when the time comes for me to lift something heavy, I'll be able to do it because I've been doing my bicep curls. I have to do my spiritual bicep curls, right? By self-sacrifice for other people. Page 130, they say we have to place our spiritual development ahead of business or professional success. It doesn't mean we ignore our careers. I've had like a good career. I went to school. I got 2 master's degrees. I worked in business, but but I made sure that in the mornings I did my 11th step. At night, I did my nightly review and I sponsored people. Nothing incompatible with having a spiritual way of living and a career. And page 130, those of us who spent much time in the world of spiritual make-believe have eventually seen the childishness of it. This dream world has been replaced by a great sense of purpose, accompanied by a growing consciousness of the power of God in our lives. What a beautiful promise, right? Like we stop running from the food and we start running toward an enhanced relationship with God, toward a greater ability to help others, a great sense of purpose, and a growing consciousness, not just that God exists, but of God's power in our lives, that God does for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. And then tells us something about God, like what does God want? We have come to believe that He, God, would like us to keep our head in the clouds with Him, but that our feet ought to be planted on earth. That's where our fellow travelers are, and that's where our work must be. Well, how do I keep my head in the clouds with God? I think it starts, in the morning, saturating myself with God, spending time in spiritual literature that will increase my knowledge of God, my love of God. And then to think about Him during the day, to just be with Him, recognize His presence, talk to Him throughout the day. But my feet firmly planted on earth, doing the work that I have to do. Right before this meeting, I unloaded the dishwasher, right? Feet firmly planted on earth. They say there's nothing incompatible between a powerful spiritual experience and a life of sane and happy usefulness. And they say, okay, what if we're living with hard people? Page 130. Nothing will help the man who is off on a spiritual tangent, and I believe members of our family who aren't doing well. Nothing will help them so much as the wife who adopts a sane spiritual program, making a better practical use of it. We apply spiritual principles, and then it's amazing how the other people in our family get better. Page 131. They tell us we can do other things. We can get involved in clubs, civic duties, sports, and we should be okay if the other people in our family want to do that. It shouldn't be, husband, you need to stay home with me 7 nights a week. If he wants to play on a sports team, great. And they say at the beginning, the couple ought to frankly face the fact that each will have to yield here and there. So again, compromise, right? We compromise. Father will necessarily spend much time with other alcoholics, but this activity should be balanced, right? How much balance? People sometimes say, well, how much time should I spend? Um, in I think it's chapter 3, but I'm not sure. It says we spend much of our spare time in this work. So my spare time is the time like after my job, after taking care of like my health, which for me includes exercising, taking care of, hygiene, because we don't want to be the people, I'm so busy, I don't have time to take a shower, taking care of my family obligations, all that. Then what's left over is spare time. Much of that should be spent helping others. Doesn't say all of it. I like to read novels. I like to watch a good series on Netflix. American Idol has just started up again. I like to watch that. We have time to do stuff. But if I'm watching as much TV or reading as many books as I would like, I may not be spending enough time. Much of our spare time spent helping others. And it says other people who aren't alcoholics or compulsive eaters, thoughtful consideration is given their needs. So even when we're with like our normal friends who don't have eating problems, thoughtful consideration about their needs. And bottom of 131, they start talking about like religion. They say we may want to join and take membership in a religious body. One thing we cannot do is deride, is to put down religious people. And it says, we'll find we have much in common with these people, page 132, even though we differ with them on many matters. If he doesn't argue about religion, he will make new friends and is sure to find new avenues of usefulness and pleasure. I go to a Bible study. I don't agree with everything that's taught. I go to a church, really like my church, do not agree with everything 100%. I've gone to different churches. I've never found one I agree with 100%. And that's okay. I don't have to agree with everything, right? And they say if we join a religious body, we'll find new avenues of usefulness. That's great to always be useful. So it's like we can volunteer with a kids program or sing in the choir or whatever. And pleasure. Like it's okay to do things that make us happy. We're allowed to be happy. And they say, you can be a bright spot in a congregation. They say this is not mandatory, right? As non-denominational people, because the writers of this big book took no position on religion, says we can't make up others' mind. Each individual should consult his own conscience. But it tells us we may be a bright spot to a priest, minister, or rabbi who gives his all to minister to our troubled world. Isn't that a beautiful way to look at people? To just say, you know what, the priest, minister, rabbi, they're really trying. They're doing their best. And I think that's how we should look at everyone. People are trying. People are doing their best. And then they go ahead and say, page 132, we are not a glum lot. So a spiritual principle, we are not a glum lot. We show up, showing that we are happy. Say, if newcomers could see no joy or fun in our existence, they wouldn't want it. Principle, we absolutely insist on enjoying life. Things are fun. We can dance in our kitchen. It's fine. Another principle, we try not to indulge in cynicism over the state of the nations, nor do we carry the world's troubles on our shoulders. So we are not cynical about what's going on in the world. We do what we think God would have us, and we don't take the weight of the world on our shoulders. I've mentioned before something that really something that really hits me is human trafficking. That just guts me. Um, but I pray for the people who are trafficked, and I pray for the traffickers that God changes their hearts. And I give money to an organization that helps. And that's really all I can do. That's all I feel that I can do right now. Maybe at some point I can do more. And so it doesn't cause me to, I can't take the world's troubles on my shoulders. But it tells us we're not supposed to be cynical. And especially in these rooms, we don't indulge in cynicism over the state of the nations. Things in America are really polarized right now. We don't indulge in cynicism there. And they say, what do we do when we see a person sinking into the mire that's alcoholism, that's compulsive eating? We give them first aid and place what we have at his disposal. We help them. For that person's sake, we recount and almost relive the horrors of our past. But those of us who've tried to shoulder the entire burden and trouble of others find we are soon overcome by them. My daughter had a major problem recently, and it was really difficult for me. And then I had to work through it and just say, I'm here to support her, but this is hers, not mine. This is hers to work through. What's my role? How am I supposed to support her and help her? But it's not mine. Otherwise, I sponsor some people. If I took all their troubles and made them mine, I wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning. I try and help them, but I know what's mine. It says we try to help others, but we don't take all their burdens on our shoulders. And then a beautiful principle: cheerfulness and laughter make for usefulness. They say those in bad health and those who seldom play don't laugh much. But why shouldn't we laugh? We have recovered and have been given the power to help others. Isn't that beautiful? And then page 133, what a beautiful line. We are sure, like they're positive, God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. Well, that tells me something about God. This isn't a God who's waiting to get me with a baseball bat for all the things I've done wrong. This is a God who wants me to be happy, to be full of joy, to be free from the food obsession. And then a really important principle: we cannot subscribe to the belief that this life is a vale of tears. So I once belonged to the other shoe is going to drop club, right? Like things are going well, but they can't keep going well, or they're bad and they're going to keep getting bad. Like this life is just a vale of tears, it's misery, and we hang on till we get to the other side. And says we don't subscribe to this belief. So if you're subscribed to that belief, I say you can unsubscribe. You can say, like, to whom it may concern, I hereby unsubscribe from the belief that this life is a vale of tears. And I subscribe to the belief that my creator wants me to be happy, joyous, and free. It says, generally, we've made our own misery. God didn't do it. So avoid the deliberate manufacture of misery. But if trouble comes, because look, people get horrible diagnoses, bad things happen, people die unexpectedly. Cheerfully capitalize it as an opportunity to demonstrate God's omnipotence. There was a pastor I heard who his daughter had a very severe mental illness. Her name was Jill. He started Jill's House as a place to give respite care for caregivers. A lot of us have heard of Johnny Erickson Tata. She was in a diving accident when she was a teenager, and she's a quadriplegic. And, what does she do? She spends her life helping other handicapped people. So when trouble comes, we cheerfully capitalize it as an opportunity to demonstrate his omnipotence. Now, sometimes at the very beginning of something, like we get a diagnosis or something horrible happens to one of our children, that's when we need our friends and our fellows to carry us for a while. So it's not like, oh, someone just got a cancer diagnosis, let me be cheerful about. No, I mean, come on. We're allowed to be sad, but we don't have to be crippled by our sadness. Okay? And then they tell us A body burned by alcohol doesn't recover overnight, nor do twisted thinking and depression vanish in a twinkling. But they say, we are convinced a spiritual mode of living is a powerful health restorative. We are miracles of mental health. So that's another miracle. We're miracles of mental health. And we've seen remarkable transformations in our body. So we're miracles of physical health too. But that doesn't mean we disregard human health measures. And I feel really strongly about this. We do not play doctor. We do not mess with anyone's medication. I have heard people are told, well, if you work these steps, you won't need antidepressants or anti-anxiety medicine. Maybe they will, maybe they don't. That is between them and their doctor. We do not mess with anyone's medication, telling them what they should or shouldn't be taking. It says, God has abundantly supplied this world with fine doctors, psychologists, and practitioners. Don't hesitate to take your health problems to such person. We don't hesitate, right, to go to such people if it's needed. They say, God has wrought miracles among us. Something, again, they're telling us God is a God who does miracles. They just like take it for granted. Yeah, this is a God who brings miracles to us. But we never belittle a good doctor or psychiatrist. Their services may be indispensable. So most of the things that they talk about alcoholics apply to compulsive eaters as well. There's a couple who don't, things that don't. Here's one. It says, when we have fatigue and we're too tired, that have candy. Guys, that one is for alcoholics who don't have eating problems. If we are tired, the solution is not to grab a candy bar. Okay. By the way, I think the other thing is they talk about, some people say, well, you have to be abstinent for 2 days before you can start working the steps. And it doesn't say that in the book. If they had meant for that to be the case, that would have clearly been in there in the chapter working with others. Now it says sometimes a man has to be defogged, right? And so maybe someone can say it takes 48 hours for someone who's like a hardcore alcoholic until they're able to even think straight again. So I looked up for a compulsive eater who's like all sugared up. How long does it take until they're cleared up enough to be able to think coherently? 2 hours. So 2 hours. So if you're trying to work with someone and she's just put down the food a second ago, you know what? Sit with her for 2 hours until she's able to be coherent. But to tell someone you have to put down the food for 2 days before I talk to you, that is not in the book. Ebby didn't do that with Bill. He went there with Bill, was drinking and planning on drinking more. And Bill didn't do that with Dr. Bob. So in the chapter, Working with Others, they're very clear about things. If they had meant for us to wait 48 hours, they would have said so. Um, okay, so finishing up bottom of page 134, they talk about how the children of addicts often act, and they say they're sometimes dominated by a pathetic hardness and cynicism. They can't seem to forgive and forget. So if we've had people in our lives who've hurt us, we should check ourselves out. Am I dominated by hardness and cynicism and inability to forgive and forget? Now, sometimes if people are still active in their addiction, they may not be safe for us to be around and we can set up boundaries. But in our hearts, we need to forgive and forget. And I will tell you that is sometimes very hard. And I think the only thing that can break the hardness in our hearts is prayer, is prayer. Okay, page 135. Whether the family, whether other people in our life go on a spiritual basis or not, we have to if we would stay in recovery. What does it mean to be in a spiritual basis? Trust God, surrender to God, clear away the wreckage of our past in each day, help others, and pray and meditate to get closer to God. And then they talk about a guy who he wasn't drinking anymore, but he smoked and he drank coffee. And his wife admonished him about it, but he said he wasn't ready to stop. And so she nagged. We are not supposed to nag or judge. And her intolerance threw him into a fit of anger. So, what could the wife have done? She could have increased her own tolerance. She could have said, you know what? My husband isn't drinking anymore. He still smokes and drinks coffee. And so I'm just going to learn to be okay, learn to be grateful for what he's done. Um, there's a cool saying they have in Al Anon. I didn't cause anyone's drinking. I can't cure anyone's drinking, but I don't have to contribute to it. I don't have to make it harder for other people. And I think sometimes when we're sponsoring, we have to be careful. Are we asking people to do more than what this program requires? Are we asking too much? We want to be really careful about that. And then they say, our friend, the guy who drank because his wife was nagging him, it was his fault. If I eat compulsively 100% of the time, it is always my fault, right? And he had to admit that and mend his spiritual fences. That's what we always do if we relapse. We see what was the spiritual cause and we fix it. And they say, okay, now he's back in AA, he's doing okay. He still smokes, he still drinks coffee, but no one judges him about it. Says she was wrong to make a burning issue out of such a matter when his more serious ailments were being rapidly cured. Love that. God does this rapidly. And then it says we have three mottos which are apropos. And not all slogans are good, by the way, like the one, keep the memory green. That is so wrong. It goes against our first step. We don't have the ability to keep the memory green. First things first. It was originally meant to be like seek first the kingdom of God, and all other things will fall into place for you. Live and let live. I worry about keeping my side of the street clean. I don't worry about other people's. And easy does it. Like relax. If we are doing this, the miracles will happen. And with that, I will pass.